Hello friends! So for this month's crocheting video, we decided to go with a horror movie theme just because when I worked at the movie theater, you know, every Valentine's Day season a new scary movie came out. Don't know why, but it's fun, so I figured let's do an homage to that. I know I already kind of sort of did an It, as well as I talked a lot about Stephen King in past videos, but I'm gonna condense it. I think, maybe, possibly, I don't know, we'll see. So my first favorite Stephen King fact is his book Misery. His Anna, his stalker, his person, quote-unquote person, that was obsessed with his life was actually cocaine and alcohol. He was very heavily an addict, but, you know, his addictions were the things that were obsessed with him. They loved him, they controlled him, and also fun fact, maybe this isn't a fun fact, but it's interesting, right? But to go with that, he does not remember at all writing Cujo, and I have to say that is insane. And I guess I have heard about like athletes getting a little drunk or being under the influence, and then they wake up the next day and they're like baseball pitchers and they throw a perfect game and, you know, they're relaxed. But I can't imagine a creative type being able to write out an entire novel that just became such a successful movie that, I don't know, it's just, to me, that's the best fact. Well, not the best fact, the craziest fact about Stephen King, at least in terms of his art and addiction. The next fun fact actually comes from the novel The Dead Zone. Greg Stilson is a door-to-door Bible salesman. He goes up to this lone trailer and there's a dog that's tied up in the front yard that's barking at him like maliciously. So he goes up to the door, he knocks, and nobody's there. And this is like on a highway, it's a long stretch of road, there's no other house, there's no other trailer. And there's clearly, it's only him and the dog that's there. He looks down the stretch of the highway, there's no cars coming. So what he ends up doing is he ends up kicking this dog to death. Well, a lot of people did not like that. Stephen King received so many letters from animal activist groups, from just pet owners to animal lovers to dog lovers, saying that that wasn't okay. And how Stephen King handled it was he responded to each of those letters by saying the dog wasn't real. That's very interesting to me because after reading that from his memoir on writing, I try to incorporate that into my regular life. Because to me, what I would have wanted to do is to be like, I'm a writer, I'm an artist, this is my creative work, this is my job. But he didn't do any of that. He simplified it so much that it was like, homies, it's just words on paper. And I think about that in terms of my anxiety or things that I'm afraid of before I even do it, that it's not real. Stephen King also grew up without a dad. When he became famous, I don't know if he tried to reach out, but at that point, Stephen King had no interest in meeting him. Josh Peck wrote a book called Happy People Are Annoying, and he wrote about his dad not wanting him and wanting nothing to do with him, and because his dad had already had a family. And he's talked about this in countless interviews, but you can also read it in depth in his book. And Josh Peck also got into drugs and alcohol at a very early age. Well, as an adult, right? Like maybe not necessarily like in high school. And it's interesting because when we think about childhood stars, we think the fame ruined them. After reading Josh Peck's book, I really think it was it was Fight Club syndrome, which is also something. Oh, I don't think I ever actually did Fight Club. I think I filmed it and then I didn't like it, so I didn't upload it. But yeah, so in Fight Club and the movie and book, they kind of touch on not having a dad really just messing up with your psyche as a young man. And I kind of think that's where Josh Peck and Stephen King kind of came from in terms of like their drug and alcohol. I mean, I'm not their therapist, I don't know. But it is interesting to see that they kind of had like that same outlier. And like I said, in Happy People Are Annoying, it didn't seem that fame ruined Josh Peck. I really do think that it stemmed from like this emptiness of not knowing his dad. But so I kind of wonder if that's where Stephen King kind of falls also. Carrie was interesting. He got the idea of writing Carrie from when he was a janitor in high school and he was cleaning out a high school girl locker room and just that vibe. But also on the radio, he's obviously a big dork. He was very into sci-fi. He would listen to sci-fi radio, and somewhere on there it said, you know, girls right before they get their period actually have the ability to get telekinesis. So that's where the idea of Carrie came from. When he started writing it, he was kind of like flustered because at the time he was only ever writing short stories, but he knew that if this was going to be worth the writing, it was going to have to be a novel, and he had never done that before. He had actually gotten so frustrated, he took the manuscript and trashed it. His wife then dug it out of the trash, read it, and told him to finish it. Yeah, he then went on, and this is all in his memoir, he then went on to say that his publisher called him, said, "Hey, are you sitting down?" And Stephen King said, "No." And then he told him that, you know, they bought it they're going to give him $400,000 to publish it. And then when he told his wife later when she came home, she looked around and she wept. Carrie was actually inspired also by a girl that he went to high school with who was poor, and you know, the kids would make fun of her for being poor and wearing shabby clothes. And then one day, like, I guess she had to have cried to her mom and just begged for her to get a perm and her hair done and like new clothes. And when she came to school after getting all this done, like the kids like ridiculed her, like just absolutely destroyed her because like they knew it was just for show, and it like devastated her. And then he would see how this once fresh look just slowly became ragged because, you know, her mom and dad weren't going to be able to pay for new clothes and to upkeep with her hair. So eventually this new look went right back to looking shaggy. Oh, it really breaks your heart. And Stephen King says a million stories will appear in your life every single day, right? Because obviously I mentioned 3 different things that created Carrie from his everyday life. But a writer has to know which story is worth writing about. Stephen King also talked about he would read on the treadmill, and he can't imagine being on the treadmill without a book. And I have to say, that is preposterous. I can't imagine doing anything on the treadmill. I guess maybe if you were walking, you'd have to be going very slow. I don't know. I couldn't do it. I have to run to get warm anyway, just so I can work out. But I can't imagine reading to help me work out. Stephen King has plans of opening up a writer's retreat, which is odd because in his memoir, he talks about writers' retreats not being great. Because you're not gonna complete an entire novel within a week or within a weekend or within a month. You have to work at it. And he even goes into detail as to why would you take your roughest pieces of art and work and just your words and read them to everybody out loud for everybody to just pick apart before it's even done. Like, it doesn't make sense. So that's interesting. I just learned that now, looking up more facts for him. So I don't know why he would do this, but I don't know. I guess we'll find out when he officially opens it. Okay, so let's talk movies. Andy Muschietti, phenomenal job, the remake. I will say, I think because he had such a strong part 1, part 2, we kind of actually forget that part 2, or we forgive a lot that part 2 was only okay, especially since, because the first part was just so great. I think my only big qualm with part 1 was the rock fighting scene. That was goofy and quirky. And it kind of, his movie Mama from 2013 also was kind of quirky, a little weird in there, not just scary. It did freak me out. I watched that in theaters. And I hadn't watched it since. It wasn't great enough for me to be like, I want to revisit this. I know a lot of people that had watched it from home, and the first time they saw it, they said it was corny, but it was okay for what it was. It was still a little scary. Like I said, I don't think I would watch it again and be just as scared as I was the first time watching it, right? Yeah, so good cast for part 1 and for part 2. They did a good job on at least touching on the queer aspect. The book had very heavy queer innuendos and associations with, especially Everybody Living Bill, but I talked a lot about this in the other video, so by all means have fun if you want to hear me talk about that. And I'm going to have a hard time actually being able to criticize the TV movie, it starring Tim Curry, just because I grew up with it, right? I have that childhood nostalgia. I know for me personally, the scariest scene was Eddie in the shower and Pennywise comes out of the drain. That freaked me out then. It's still weird now. And this was kind of funny. I guess this is one of those things that I can say that I always thought was weird, and it was just like not a mistake, it was just an oversight, or just they couldn't figure it out, was the one library scene where the balloons were popping in everyone's faces and the blood was going directly onto their faces. You can see the nervousness and, blink and like just the pull back from when these balloons pop in the actors' faces. But like they're not even supposed to notice it, but obviously like you can't stop that. Like your body's gonna have that natural reaction to a balloon popping in your face. You're gonna close your eyes. Your eyes need to be protected, so your eyelids are gonna shut. There's no way around it. That has to happen. I remember staying up and watching it, and then the next day staying up and watching part 2, because it was, like I said, it was a TV movie. It just, that nostalgia just like popped into my brain, and then we got the VHS of it, and I don't know why they did this, but they put the credits in between part 1 and part 2. Like, I guess it was to encourage people to watch the credits, but we fast forward it to part 2 100% of the time. Also, when it comes to fictional clowns or fictional horror scary clowns, American Horror Story Freak Show, definitely up there for sure. When that came out, maybe it wasn't when it came out. I think it was on Netflix at one point. I had actually was really sick and I had been watched that entire season. And to this day, it's my favorite season. And Freak Show's clown was actually inspired by John Wayne Gacy. And I watched that documentary on Netflix where the one kid only survived because he thought it was like this test, and he like pinned down John Wayne Gacy, and you know, like, had him submissive and everything else. It was like, John Wayne Gacy was like, good job, you did a great job. And, you know, he released John Wayne Gacy, the kid released John Wayne Gacy, and John Wayne Gacy let him live. And I thought that was horrifying and scary, and honestly, I kind of think John Wayne Gacy was also probably the inspiration for Black Phone, if we're thinking about it, but not too many people liked Black Phone. Is that what it is? I think what it is. Yeah, I don't think too many people liked that movie. I liked it. Again, I think there was just a lot of elements in that movie also. I think if you want to do something surreal, but also paranormal, but also scary, I don't know, like, there's way too many elements in that movie. So for people to be like, I don't like it, I'm like, I get it. I liked it, but again, one and done. Okay, so finally, let's talk about this little crochet doll. This pattern doesn't belong to me. As always, I will put the link in the description of this video in case you decided to want to make it yourself. The only thing that I will say that I didn't necessarily like is this orange that I'm using for Pennywise's hair. I wish it was more of a burnt orange, or maybe I would have just did red. We'll see it at the end, but it ends up kind of looking like Chucky Finster. As always, thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe, do all those cool things. You're the greatest. Love you. Bye.